Caden's POV.
Cold shivers ran down my spine almost as soon as Declan had handed me one of his wooden knives. I could feel it past my gut. It was almost as though I could hear my name. The feeling was unfamiliar and made me uneasy. I rose to my feet immediately, glancing out the window. There was nothing there, but I still didn't feel comfortable. My instincts were always right, and the first thing I guessed was that there was a rival cunt on my tail. Perhaps they'd followed us all the way here. If it was true, then they were messing with the wrong wolf. I looked back at Declan, who'd gotten himself busy when I had stood up the first time. They'd probably come after him first. I needed to make sure he was safe. I tapped at his shoulders before scooping him up in one swift movement and made my way to his room. I set him down quickly on the single bed and shut the window blinds, leaving only the electrical lights on to illuminate the room before walking back to the bed. Crouching down to his eye level, I kissed his forehead and pulled away, taking relief in his innocent yet curious eyes. "Declan, you stay here, okay?" I half whispered, just loud enough for him to hear me. "Don't run around, don't say anything. Just stay here until Daddy gets back. I'll open the door for you, okay?" I wasn't sure he understood a word of what I said, but he nodded nonetheless. I ran a hand through his hair one last time before walking out and locking the door. I dropped the keys underneath the doormat before dashing out of the cabin, only to hear the piercing, gut-wrenching scream of a woman. And she was calling my name with desperation in her tone, although extremely faint. "Larissa." Realization suddenly set in when I heard my name the third time, stopping me in my tracks. Whoever they were, they had her. They had Larissa, those bastards. I would kill them. Every single fucking one of them. Without thinking, I dashed into the woods. "Larissa! Larissa!" I continued to yell as I ran deeper through the woods, struggling to follow the sounds of her frantic voice. They grew clearer as I continued to inch closer, until I was face to face with a pool of wolves in an open space hurdled at one tree.
"Get away right now!"
I yelled in rage, watching them separate one after the other until there was one left hovering over a figure pinned to the tree. I could hear the muffled cries now, and her bellowing my name one last time before the bastard stepped back with a smirk plastered on his face. I could finally see her. Larissa. My Larissa, with both arms tied across the girth of the tree. Her hair was a disheveled mess. Her cheeks that used to glow and pull me in now housed a bunch of purpling bruises. They were tear-stained, and even more tears fell from her swollen eyes as she looked at me. Those doe eyes were pleading. There were scratch marks on her face that traveled down to her dress that had been torn all the way past her shoulders. They were barely hanging there. I could feel my blood boil in that instant. They've messed with the wrong alpha. I would show them why the Griffin Howl pack was so feared amongst wolves. These bastards would not live to see the blackout tonight. With now flaming eyes, I looked around to catch the eyes of the cunt that had been hovering over her. I recognized him all too quickly with the ugly smirk on his face. Running a hand through his hair, he took big steps in my direction. "Hey, Caden. I see you're quite early to join the fun," he remarked while running a hand through his hair. He had some nerve to speak to me like that. And with that, I balled a fist and sent it flying straight into his ugly nose. "I told you, bigoted fool, not to fuck with any Omega in my pack. And certainly not my Omega," I yelled angrily, charging at him with fully extended claws.
"Caden!"
I heard Larissa scream again and turned around, only to see one of his idiots running in my direction. I grabbed him by the neck, tossing him harshly against a tree. I could care less if he lived or died. There was another one who reached straight for my neck, but I caught him just in time to send an elbow into his abdomen. But the sounds of flesh welching caused me to stop and look back, to see Dolph with his claws deep in my abdomen.
"Let him go!"
"Let him go, you fucking bastards!" She screamed again, followed by a string of incomprehensible cries. "Are you going to let them get away with what they've done to Larissa, Caden? Don't fucking die on me." I could hear Peter's angry voice yell at me. I'd suppressed him for so long. It was time for them to know that I wasn't one to be messed with. I looked down to where Dolph's claw still stayed and forcefully pulled it out. I could see the mortification slowly creep in on his face as I pulled it and fell to the ground. Closing my eyes, I let Peter take over. I shot up almost immediately, charging at whatever was in my wake. Dolph had transformed as well, rushing at my neck, but I was quick to catch him and force him to back up against a tree. He gasped at the tightness on his neck, coughing and struggling to push my grip away. He couldn't. Instead, there was another wolf behind me who dug his claws in my wound again. Angry, I grabbed Dolph and tossed him in the direction of the wolf who'd attacked me before rushing to stab at his heart. I turned again, scratching the next one who decided to face me and twisting his neck so hard I could hear the bones crack to my utmost pleasure. One by one, I incapacitated his squad till there was just Dolph left. He was smirking at me now, wiping the blood that trickled from his nostrils.
You want her so bad?
You should have said so that day. He yelled, still smirking. He was trying to get under my skin. He'd already done it, if that was he wanted. But what he was still oblivious to was the fact that he was beat.
Tell that to the devil when you see him. And remember to send my greetings from the Alpha of the Alphanovel pack.
I spat back, rushing at him blindly. He charged at me equally, but I reached for his head first. He sent a jab at my wound, forcing me to cough out. There was blood everywhere, but I could see was Larissa tied up and her soft, defeated sobs. Never again. With that, I sent an elbow to his temples before punching him to the ground. He was gasping for air now, struggling to get back on his feet when I struck a kick back to his temples and he fell half dead on the ground. That wasn't enough. I reached down to feel his weakened pulse before sinking both claws through his chest. I could feel his heart pound rapidly and faster before coming to an eerily deafening stop. All I could think of as I staggered to my feet was Larissa. I wiped my blood-stained hands on my ruined pants and only then did everything come rushing back in. Drawing ragged breaths, I dragged my feet to where she stood against the tree. I couldn't see clearly, but I could hear the soft sobs that fell from her lips. I could hear her call out my name, but the pain from my abdomen was suddenly blinding. Grunting harshly, I pressed at it with one hand and reached for her cheeks with the other, lightly hovering over it before smearing the tears that had streamed down her face. "You're okay now," I ground out, wincing while she struggled to wriggle her way out of the ropes. "You're fine. They're all gone, every one of their bloody asses. They won't come near you ever again." I continued with a tight-lipped smile, struggling to see past the blur that was enveloping my vision. "I'm fine, but you're not. You're hurt." I heard her cry out softly, and soon she was grabbing my arm, still sobbing. I bit back what I imagined was a smile, still wiping at her eyes. I didn't know if I was thinking about anything anymore. I just wanted her to be okay. But it was blinding. Slowly, I felt my consciousness slipping from me. And no matter how much I wanted to stop her crying, I still heard her cries even when I could no longer see anything. I let nature take its course and fell to my knees, closing my eyes to nothingness.
Larissa's POV.
Caden, please, Caden. I screamed in horror as he collapsed his entire weight on my body, feeling all the moisture drain from my throat. The angry-eyed Alpha, who had been standing in front of me a moment ago, snapping heads off, laid limp in my arms, his eyes closed as if in death. I fell to the ground as well, crumpling the dried leaves that littered the forest floor and pulled him so that his head laid on my laps. Every so often, I felt him rouse in half-consciousness, until he no longer flinched and both arms now sprawled on the dust. I stiffened at the lack of movement, then moved to gently shake his head, but he still didn't move. Caden, can you hear me?" I whimpered out, struggling to tap at his face again. I felt time stiffen for a solid minute in that moment. How could this be happening again? It was all my fault. Fear had ridden my entire being, and I could care less about the ringing in my head. The viciousness of the attack had caused blood to trickle down his arms. It was like he was bleeding from every part of his body. Without thinking, I brought one hand to where the biggest wound was, pressing it down while tapping his face with the other. I'd seen Dolph try to rip life out from him, and I felt my chest clench at the thought. "Caden, please wake up. I'm sorry." I sobbed quietly, in fear that Dolph's men might be more than the decapitated bodies of wolves lying around. If that was the case, we were in serious danger. If I hadn't left the cabin, if only I'd tried to understand you better. "I'm sorry, but please don't die on me." I choked out a string of sobs, clenching my eyes shut as I felt hot tar sear out of my eye rims. "I can't afford for you to die on me as well." My hands were trembling as they ran through the blotches of dried and fresh blood on his face. He wasn't healing. I felt my heart pounding out of my chest at this point. Crying wasn't going to save any of us now. Still shaking, I brought my hands to wipe the tears that had stained my cheeks. I pushed my hair back just enough for it to stay out of my face. Ignoring the sting that coursed through my body, I placed his head on the leaves and forced my legs to move. I rose to my feet, then reached down to pull his body from the ground. His head swung back painfully, and I heard a small groan escape him. I pulled him with all my might, ignoring his dead weight. Swinging one arm over my neck, I gripped his abdomen and started for the cabin. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't stop myself from crying. I was mad at him. Why did he have to come? What if something worse had happened to him? What if No. He couldn't make Declan an orphan at such a young age. I couldn't lose my mate a second time. I continued to drag him as much as I could, straining to see in the growing darkness until we reached the gate to the cabin. I hurriedly pulled him through the gates and to the front door. I reached for the knob with still trembling hands, but the stupid door wouldn't budge. Why won't this fucking door open? I pulled at the knob harshly again and it finally creaked open. Without thinking twice, I pulled him to the largest couch in the living room. His bleeding had caused a trail I'd only just noticed, just as soon as I noticed sobbing coming from an adjacent room. But finding a first aid box was more important. I walked to the only cabinet in the large living room, frantically searching for the first aid box. Come on, come on. It has to be here somewhere. I yelled out in frustration, rummaging through the wide cabinet and leaving bloodstains all over. When I couldn't find anything, I finally turned to the door to the room I'd heard the now quieted sobs. I twisted the door knob and pushed, but it was firmly shut. What the fuck? Matt. I heard his voice softly, followed by a heart-wrenching grunt. I rushed to his sides, half relieved that he was awake and half horrified because the bleeding hadn't slowed down in the slightest. Caden, can you hear me? Fuck it. He muttered again, gripping the bleeding area with one hand. I felt yet another string of tears flow, and I pressed on the wound. Fuck it. He muttered again, but louder. His face was scrunched and his lips were parted. The mat, Larissa, the mat. What mat? That room. He grunted again. I rushed back to the door that had refused to open, pulling the floor mat away. There was a single key there. It had to be the key to the room. I picked up the key and inserted it in the keyhole, twisting it, and it finally opened. But it opened to a red-faced toddler sitting on the floor in the center of the room, clutching a wooden knife for dear life. Oh God. I had totally forgotten that Declan was here. I rushed to his side and pulled him into a small hug. Eyes closed, I cried. Not a loud sob, no tears. I just cried at the thought that I wasn't enough to protect this innocent child in my arms. His father was bleeding and had almost died because of me. How would he have coped? What? I'm sorry, my love. I sobbed quietly, rubbing small soothing circles into his back. I felt him relax as he nuzzled into my neck, grabbing my ripped sleeves tightly. I wanted to stay and comfort him, but his father's life was on the line. Declan dear, don't cry, But you'll do Isa a big favor now. I want you to sit on the bed and wait for me. I'll come back and sing you a song once I'm done with Daddy. All right? I said softly, running a hand through his hair as he nodded. Flashing him a pained smile, I took him to the bed and continued my search for a first aid box. I finally found one inside a drawer. Why did it have to be so far away in the first place? I picked up the box and did a little wave at the child before dashing out of the room and back to the couch where his father laid. I placed the box on the ground, fishing out a bottle of rubbing alcohol and some cotton balls. Picking up some scissors, I tore open the shirt where it had stuck to his skin with blood. Placing some cotton balls in rubbing alcohol, I struggled to clean out the wound. My vision was blurry seeing him this vulnerable. He winced ever so slightly, but no sounds escaped him. The wound was deep. It was even worse that it appeared as a cluster from the Dolph's claws. Why did you do that? I whimpered again as I cleaned, and he roused. Startled, I looked up to see a pair of emerald eyes staring back at me. He looked almost confused, only wincing when I pressed the balls onto his wound. Are you crying? He croaked out, one trembling hand reaching for my face. More tears fell with his action. Why are you crying? Nothing, I muttered back, wiping at my eyes with the back of one hand. You're clearly crying. Even if I look like death, I'm not blind. So, don't give me that smug response. He drawled out, clenching his eyes, from the sting of the rubbing alcohol. You almost died because of me, I whispered as dryly as I could muster. He was awake now, there was no need to give him the satisfaction of my fear for the worst. My eyes, however, betrayed me terribly. They would have come after the cabin even if I didn't do that. I know, and I'm thankful to you for saving my life a second time. But you don't have to do such things for me. What do you mean? He groaned out, fluttering his eyes. His consciousness was slipping again. Why don't you get some rest first? I'll heal regardless. So, explain yourself. All I'm saying is, stop doing things like that for me. I'll feel indebted to you if you keep doing things like that. I don't want to be indebted to someone who doesn't even give a shit about me. I snapped, but softly, dropping the scissors before reaching for a wire gauze. I looked back to meet his eyes, but they had closed again in slumber. Even now, you still act like you don't care, I whispered before rising to my feet and wiping at my now puffy eyes again. He was sound asleep and his breathing had stabilized. I picked up the box and returned to the room where Declan had gone quiet. The toddler was sound asleep on the bed, desperately hugging a pillow with one hand and holding his wooden knife in the other. I reached down to kiss his cheek, smiling gently when he shrugged in his sleep. I'm sorry again. With that, I walked out of the room and shut the door. Sliding down the door, I gathered my knees to my bosom and closed my eyes. The greater danger had been averted, but I couldn't help but blame myself for everything that had happened today. I let the tears that must have filled a bucket continue to fall.
Caden's POV.
The woods I'd been hunting in were now pitch blackness. Even my wolf vision couldn't help me see in this uncanny darkness. Strapping my bow tightly, I reached for the holster on my pants and drew out a pistol. The environment suddenly felt unfamiliar, followed by the noises of cackles and low grunting. Fucking hyenas. I growled under my breath, gripping the pistol tightly. I knew they were foolish, but not this foolish. The sounds of cackling grew with every step that I took, until the whole woods were saturated with a mix of voices that I was only familiar with in battle. And that's when the awful ringing in my head started, coursing through my entire being like being injected with lava.
Arg!
I let go of the pistol. The thud to the ground was somewhat deafening. I reached for my ears, gripping it tightly, but the ringing only seemed to grow louder. Slowly, I fell to the ground from the pain in my head and ears. I was almost certain that my ears were bleeding at this point. The ringing had amplified 1,000 notches, leaving me groaning and grasping for air that was just out of reach. The ringing only grew louder and louder until it suddenly went quiet. My eyes that were shut from the abominable pain flickered, but my eyelids remained shut. I tried to move my fingers around, but the last time I checked, they had been sitting in my ears. Now they just laid limp by my sides. If confusion had birthed a son, then I was its offspring. Blinking as rapidly as I could, I finally fluttered my eyes open only to be met by blinding lights traveling through what I had imagined was the forest floor. But my back, although uncomfortable, felt awfully soft for this to be the forest floor. I clenched my eyes at the light intensity, only slowly opening them to meet white ceilings, and realization finally set in. This wasn't the forest floor, I was hallucinating. This was one of the small spare rooms in my cabin, definitely far from the grandest. Turning my head slowly, I strained to reach for the sides of the bed frame, pulling myself up with as much strength I could muster. But my actions were cut short by the sharp throbbing that shot up from my abdomen straight into my head. I let out a low grunt at the feeling, sliding back into a lying position. It hurt like hell. What the fuck happened? The last thing I remember was Larissa strapped to a tree with a bloodied face and pleading eyes. And me lying on the couch in the living room. The more I struggled to remember her screaming, the more I saw her defeated face in the living room and the pain in my head intensified. What was she thinking? And how the fuck did I get here? My train of thoughts were brought to a stifling halt by the smell of toast traveling through the room. My eyes flipped open almost immediately, ignoring the harsh intensity of the rays that traveled from the window and rested on any solid object in the room. By my accurate judgment, this was morning. Letting out a soft sigh, I instinctively grabbed onto my lower abdomen and pushed the white sheets away. I pushed my feet down and rose to my feet, tightening my grip when there was a dull throb there. What the hell? I walked to the tall mirror that stood by the sides of the all-white room, finally noticing the large bandage wrapped around my torso. Tilting my head to the sides in confusion, I pulled my hands away ever so slowly and saw a patch of blood seeping through the cotton wool placed over my injury. The rest of my upper torso and arms, and every other thing that stayed bare above my gray sweatpants, were littered with now purpling bruises. How long had I been out for? I ran one hand through my surprisingly fluffed-out hair before ultimately deciding to leave the room. If I didn't, my stomach would continue to grumble like a damn beast that hadn't been fed in months. Like Dolph would have been if I hadn't killed him first. Fuck it, I would rather have seen him die in the slowest way possible till he begged for death with the same lips he used to taunt Larissa. I fluffed out my hair one more time before walking out of the room. The smell of toast had worsened, and so did the rumbling. I took one careful step after the other, with one hand still wrapped around my injury till I reached the foot of the short stairs. Almost immediately, I could sight Declan by the dining table in the mini kitchen. He was sipping on what looked like warm milk infused with vanilla. I felt a small smile creeping on my lips. I could barely remember the last time I noticed how he loved to drink vanilla milk. It reminded us both of the woman who'd abandoned us, but he seemed to like it regardless. "You have milk smeared all over your lips, Declan," I said softly, although my voice had come out raspier than I intended. He looked up with a wide grin on his face and dropped his glass. The next thing I knew, he'd climbed up the chair and latched onto my neck in a pool of giggles, with his legs wrapped around the left of my torso. I let out a chuckle of my own at that, balancing his weight on one hand and the other on my covered wound. "Daddy's a little hurt, son." "What does it mean?" he questioned with wide eyes, and I laughed lightly. If anything, his eyes only grew as if I'd just added to his confusion. "Declan dear," another voice called out. That tone was unmistakable. I whipped my head around, sighting the blonde-haired woman emerging from the kitchen with a tray full of toast and porridge. She walked right past me to where the dining table stood, setting down the tray before walking back to where I stood. "My lord, if you don't mind, I'd love to take it from here." My lord? My lord? Whenever has she called me that? My lips had curled up into an annoyed smirk at this point, but I let her take my son back to his seat. What was she pulling now? She'd called me by my name that day, even screaming it like I was going to die, so why was she being fucking weird? I hissed under my breath and walked to my seat at the head of the table. The throbbing in my head had lost its momentum already, but the pain in my abdomen had become worse. I let out another low grunt, holding onto the table for mild support. Soon I heard footsteps shuffling and Larissa was by my side, pulling the seat out for me. Her small fingers were careful to only touch the bandages. "Let me help you," she said dryly, pulling me down to the chair ever so gently. Without even sparing me a glance, she walked back to the kitchen. I was annoyed at this point. If this were a few months back, I'd have been seething and might have even locked her up again. But for some reason, this time was different. No matter how much I wanted to snap at her, I couldn't bring myself to do so. All too quickly, she returned with another bowl of porridge and a plate of bacon and set it in front of me. Straight-faced, she pulled out another seat and sat down. "I'm sitting here to watch over Declan, if that's okay with you."
"Do what you want,"
I replied with a stiff nod and picked up a spoon. The amount of bacon on my plate was outrageous. I only had a small injury. I wasn't near death for fuck's sake. Why this amount that could feed half my pack members? But on second thought, I was pretty hungry. I dug into the porridge while she helped Declan eat his porridge bare. Her smiles looked forced and her skin was paler than before. I could tell she looked tired beneath her gentle cooing and indifferent attitude. Her eyes gave it all away. She turned to look at me sharply as if she'd known I was looking at her. I stared right back, boring holes into her dark chocolate eyes, and she looked away with flickering eyes. "Good. Would you like some ointment and a new dressing?" She drawled out a little dryly and with a straight face, but there was a twang of embarrassment in her tone. It was almost unnoticeable, but it was still there. Did she not realize who I was? I let out a small chuckle at that. My wounds still hurt, but they were healing at an exceeding rate and didn't need a dress change. Yes. Yes, of course. It would be disastrous for my wound to get infected when my housekeeper's here, no? I answered with a smirk, half expecting a snarky comeback from her. Contrary to my elevated expectations, there was none. Instead, she nodded and returned to eating her porridge while wiping the spills on Declan's lips. What was going on? Was she hurt that I'd called her my housekeeper? But that was who she was. Well, I'd never have expected to see this level of dumb from you, Caden. You're such an idiot. I heard Peter's annoyed tone. If he had taken over, I was more than certain that he'd smack me harshly in the face. She's avoiding your stupid ass. She's creating distance between you two because you're such a retard when it comes to your own mate. Now she's closed off, what would you do?
I know, for fuck's sake. Could you shut up and cut me some slack?
I muttered back in irritation, returning to glance at Larissa's blank expression. She'd been crying that day. She looked genuinely scared and hurt when she'd asked me not to do things like that for her anymore if I didn't want anything to do with her. She'd looked so vulnerable, and I'd just done what I never should have done. I'd just fueled her dislike for me by calling her my housekeeper. It wasn't supposed to. I wasn't supposed to let this happen, but fuck, it hurt like hell seeing her look dead inside. I picked up my fork again and stabbed at the bacon, hoping that it would get her attention. Her flinch and rapid blinking told me I did, but she refused to look up. Instead, she turned to Declan with a smile and picked him up, walking straight out of the dining room.